Good evening and welcome to the 38th Annual Young American Awards Banquet. I take pleasure in introducing tonight's guest speaker. I begin by calling your attention to the last sentence of the Declaration of Independence. It reads, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." This passage is especially relevant to us this evening. The founders risked everything when they fought to create one nation under God with liberty and justice for all. These men were true patriots who persevered against tremendous odds to craft a way of government through our precious Constitution that would protect the rights of each citizen from conception to last breath. Many of these early American patriots did indeed lose their fortunes, and 9 of the 56 founders even lost their lives in their principled quest to forge a free country. Today, the tireless and heroic efforts continue of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and merchant mariners serving to ensure our freedom. Tonight's speaker is an amazing man and a great patriot whose contributions to our country harken back to the courage and integrity of our founding fathers. His early life was very similar to our young Americans here in our midst. He was a high school scholar and athlete, captaining the soccer and baseball teams. He continued his education at the College of Holy Cross, Worcester, Massachusetts, with a degree in economics. After college, he served 13 years. Am I speaking too close? Okay. He served 13 years as an officer in the U.S. Marine Corps. He saw and he met enemy fire as an infantry officer in Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm in the Persian Gulf War. While a captain on active duty, he attended the University of Notre Dame Law School, graduating summa cum laude in 1997. He then served several years as a Marine Judge Advocate while attaining the rank of Major. His personal military decorations include the Meritorious Service Medal, the Navy Commendation Medal, and the Navy Achievement Medal. Today, he continues his service to country, but shifted the battlefield to the courtrooms of America. He is an American attorney specializing in constitutional law litigation. He is the co-founder and senior counsel of the American Freedom Law Center, a nonprofit law firm whose stated mission is to fight for faith and freedom. His defense of life and liberty takes him to state and federal trial and appellate courts all across the country and up to the U.S. Supreme Court. An example of his many challenges in court is his recent defense of a Southern Californian schoolteacher to display posters in her public school classroom bearing patriotic slogans such as "One Nation Under God" and "In God We Trust." More recently, Rob has been involved with various cases defending American freedoms against the growing threat of Sharia law. Through his work, he has appeared on many national television programs, numerous local and national radio shows, and in many national and local newspapers and periodicals, including the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. The federal judiciary described him as one of the leading attorneys in the country in the area of protecting religious freedoms and speech. He was also recognized by the National Law Journal as the Appellate Lawyer of the Week. Ladies and gentlemen, I am truly humbled and honored to present to you a patriot of modern times, an attorney, fellow veteran, and by the way, happily married father of 12 children. I'll repeat that, 12 children. Major Robert Muise of the U.S. Marine Corps.
First of all, I want to thank the Western Connecticut Military Officers Association for inviting me to really this extraordinary event. It was surprising to me when I saw the 38th Annual Young American Awards. 38 years they've been doing this. I'm often, in the cases that I handle, I appear before panels of liberal judges. So it's good to finally be before a crowd of flag-waving, God-fearing, patriotic Americans like all of you here. I also want to thank all the members, sponsors, and supporters for doing this, for putting on this event, because not only are you helping these young, outstanding men and women, and they truly are outstanding. I had an opportunity to read a bit about them in their biographies, but by helping them, all of you are also continuing your service to our country by preparing the next great generation, as I hope to explain a little further. So again, I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank Lieutenant Susan Monks for her very kind introduction. But many months ago, actually, I received a call from Susan, and I never met her. In fact, I didn't know who she was or what she wanted. But she had asked me at the time a question that I thought was a little bit odd, a little bit strange. And she asked me, "Do you believe in free speech?" And I thought, well, she's calling my work number. She probably knows that I handle a lot of First Amendment cases. And so I responded to her. I said, well, of course I do. And she said, well, how would you like to give one? And so here I am tonight, exercising my right to free speech. She mentioned in the introduction that my wife and I have been blessed with 12 children. And as I like to say, all of them are boys except for 10. So do the math. The first 9 were girls. And so when everybody kept saying, oh, you're just trying for a boy, the number 10 was a boy, the number 11 was a girl, the number 12 was a boy. So the motto in my home is, blessed are you among women. And yes, I am Catholic, and proud of it. I had the honor and privilege to serve my country as an infantry officer on active duty in the United States Marine Corps. I served for 13 years. I grew up in a Marine family. My dad served in the Marine Corps in the Korean War. My older brother enlisted in the Marine Corps. He was a sergeant in the infantry. And my younger brother was a captain in the Marine Corps in the infantry as well. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts, about 25 miles north of Boston. Grew up in a small 3-bedroom ranch house. And in that house, it was a small house with the 4 boys. At the end of the small hallway, there was a closet. And in that closet, my dad hung his dress blues jacket. And clearly the best uniform in the world, and I think it's hard to argue that point. But each of his boys would take turns proudly wearing that uniform and marching around the house. My dad passed away when I was quite young. I was 14 years old. And he certainly made an impression on my brothers and me. And one of the greatest impressions was no doubt his service to our country as a Marine and his love for our great country. And it was a love that he passed on to his sons. And we have an obligation to pass on that love to our sons, to the next generation. As already mentioned, today is June 6th, the 69th anniversary of D-Day. On June 6, 1944, 160,000 plus Allied troops landed along a 50-mile stretch of heavily fortified French coastline to fight Nazi Germany on the beaches of Normandy, France. General Eisenhower called the operation a crusade in which we will accept nothing less than full victory. More than 5,000 ships and 13,000 aircraft were used in support of this D-Day invasion. And by day's end on June 6th, the Allies gained a foothold in Normandy. Now, the D-Day invasion was not without a cost. More than 9,000 Allied soldiers were killed or wounded on that day. But more than 100,000 of those troops began the march across Europe to defeat Hitler. You know, we must never forget, and I think military members are very good at this, we must never forget our history, never forget those who fought and died for our nation and for our freedoms. You know, Tom Brokaw called the men of these times the greatest generation. And here's what he said, quote, "In the spring of 1984, I went to the northwest of France, to Normandy, to prepare an NBC documentary on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, the massive and daring Allied invasion of Europe that marked the beginning of the end of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. There I underwent a life-changing experience. As I walked the beaches with the American veterans who had returned for this anniversary, men in their 60s and 70s, and listened to their stories, I was deeply moved and profoundly grateful for all they had done. 10 years later, I returned to Normandy for the 50th anniversary of the invasion, and by then I had come to understand what this generation of Americans meant to history. It is, I believe, the greatest generation any society has ever produced." End quote. You know, I am confident, quite confident, that America is capable of producing yet another great generation of men and women who have a profound love for our country and for our God-given freedoms. Indeed, not only is America capable of producing yet another great generation, I believe it must produce that generation and do so sooner rather than later. As I look at the young men and women who are being honored here tonight, I am very much encouraged by what I see, and I see great hope. You know, I am reminded by a comment that Ronald Reagan had made during his presidency, and it's something that I think about virtually every day. And he says, you know, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. Think about that. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on to them to do the same. Indeed, each generation has a duty and an obligation to protect our freedoms, to exercise those freedoms, or they'll be lost. And when I was commissioned in the Marine Corps, like the other officers here, I took a solemn oath to God, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You know, I decided to get a law degree and to resign my commission because I feared that we had too many domestic enemies to our Constitution and that our freedoms were being eroded, not necessarily on the battlefields. Our troops were handling the battles quite well, but in the courtrooms. I decided to serve my country by changing my uniform and now going to battle in our nation's courts. Consequently, I've dedicated the last 13 years of my law practice, the entire time since I resigned my commission in 2000, to defending our first freedoms in the courtrooms across the country, literally from Massachusetts to California and to Hawaii. You know, last year, as Susan mentioned, I started a nonprofit law firm, the American Freedom Law Center, and I started it with a Jewish colleague of mine from New York, David Yerushalmi. Now, David is he's an Orthodox Jew, and I'm the Catholic guy with 12 kids, so we like to describe ourselves as the nation's first truly authentic Judeo-Christian law firm. I often to David, I said, David, you know, we were born of the same parents. You went upstream with Moses, and I went downstream with the Christians. You know, I often tell David that, you know, the Jews may have been the chosen people, but the United States was the chosen nation. And with that comes incredible responsibility. You know, as we see throughout salvation history, when a people or a nation turns its back on God, they are banished to the desert. There's no doubt in my mind that our nation was blessed at its founding. You know, the genius of our founding fathers is found in the Constitution and in its Bill of Rights, which are designed to do essentially two things: protect liberty and to prevent tyranny. Indeed, the Bill of Rights is a codification of those inalienable rights endowed by our Creator that are referenced in the very document that gave us our freedom, the Declaration of Independence. Susan touched upon this, but we must never forget the courage of our founders. When they signed that historic declaration, they were signing a death warrant, for that was an act of treason. How many of us would have the courage to do that today? I firmly believe that these men, imperfections and all, were divinely inspired and were God's instrument in creating a nation like none other, a nation that puts its trust in God. And returning to Ronald Reagan, one of my favorite presidents, he reminded us of the following. This is a quote of his from a speech. Without God, there's no virtue, because there's no prompting of the conscience. Without God, there is a coarsening of the society. Without God, democracy will not and cannot long endure. If we ever forget that we are one nation under God, then we will be a nation gone under. End quote. Now, I reference this quote for two principal reasons. One, because I think it is as true today as it was at our founding. But second, it has relevance to a case that I'm currently litigating. I'm representing a public school teacher from Buffalo, New York, who was threatened with dismissal. She was told she was going to be fired from her government job if she did not remove every reference to God from her classroom, including the quote that I just read you from Ronald Reagan. One of the other posters that offended the bureaucrats at this public school stated the following, quote, "Be on guard, stand true to what you believe, be courageous, be strong, and everything you do must be done in love." That's pretty sage advice for young and old. Be on guard, stand true to what you believe, be courageous, be strong, and everything you do must be done in love. But what was so offensive about that poster? It referenced 1 Corinthians chapter 16. This teacher was also ordered to remove small yellow sticky notes that had handwritten inspirational Bible verses that she wrote for herself that she kept discreetly displayed on the backside of her desk. In this Buffalo public school, the religious cleansing was complete. We filed a civil rights lawsuit on behalf of that teacher, which is working its way through the court system now. In the 1950s, the two biggest problems in our public schools were students talking out of turn and chewing gum in the classroom. We have since then removed prayer, the 10 Commandments, and any hint of religion from our schools. Consequently, our public schools today remain godless, while experiencing problems that would have been unimaginable just a generation ago. Indeed, attempts have been made to remove "under God" from the Pledge of Allegiance that we recited here this evening. That phrase was added during the Cold War to distinguish our nation from the godless Soviet Union. These efforts have been pushed by groups like the ACLU, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which often make repeated reference to the so-called wall of separation of church and state. But this extra constitutional construct has truly grown tiresome. The First Amendment does not demand a wall of separation of church and state. Our nation's history is replete with government acknowledgement, and indeed, some cases, accommodation of religion. In that regard, I want to share with you one more case. I literally could stand up here for hours and talk to you about these cases that I've handled over the decades, and cases that, when I would explain the facts to you, you wouldn't think were true, but they are. But I told Susan I was going to keep my comments down to 20 minutes, so I just want to address this one more case. This case involved a long-standing family tradition, one that spanned a generation. For over 60 years, Mr. John Saddle and his family had displayed a nativity scene during the Christmas season on a public median in Macomb County, Michigan. John was a boy when he first helped his dad put up the display during the 1945 Christmas season. There had never been a single complaint about that display for all those years. for 62 years until 2008, when the County Road Commission received a written complaint from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. The Road Commission acquiesced to the complaint and ordered Mr. Sadawa to remove the private display because it conveyed a religious message. Mr. Sadawa contacted me, and I promptly filed a federal civil rights lawsuit on his behalf. And after nearly 3 years of litigating this case, last August, the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit confirmed that Mr. Sadawa's private religious speech is fully protected under the First Amendment, and that by denying his request to display his nativity scene, the Road Commission violated his right to freedom of speech protected by the First Amendment and deprived him of the equal protection of the law guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. As a result of this ruling, last December 15th, this long-standing local tradition returned as Mr. Sadawa reinstalled his family nativity scene on this public median for the Christmas season. You know, a large crowd gathered for that event and spontaneously started singing Christmas carols. You know, they watched as Mr. Sadawa, who was now in his 70s, put up the nativity display while tears flowed from his eyes. And I was able to attend that event, and it was incredible. I mean, words can't describe the feeling I had with a sense of gratification for Mr. Sadawa to return that family tradition where it rightfully belonged. You know, and here's the point. You know, when the Road Commission denied Mr. Sadawa permission to put up his display, this man in his 70s could have hung his head, he could have gone home, he could have done nothing. But he didn't. He wanted to fight, and fight he did. The point is, courage comes in all forms. Whether it be those brave soldiers that stormed D-Day, our founding fathers who are defending our freedoms, or a private citizen who wants to defend his right to freedom of speech. You know, despite popular myth, recognition of the role of God in our nation's history and heritage is consistently reflected in Supreme Court decisions. The Court has acknowledged, for example, that religion has been closely identified with our history and government, and that the history of man is inseparable from the history of religion. In fact, as we all know here, those of us in the military, examples of patriotic invocations of God and official acknowledgement of religion's role in our nation's history abound. As one of our former justices observed, quote, it is unsurprising that a nation founded by religious refugees and dedicated to religious freedom should find reference to divinity in its symbols, songs, mottos, and oaths. You know, in 1775, the first day of prayer was declared when the Continental Congress designated a time of prayer in forming a new nation. And George Washington, in his farewell address, famously told us that religion and morality are the indispensable supports of our political success. Religion and morality are the indispensable supports of our political success. It was true then, and it's true now. However, more than ever, our freedom is at risk because we're being governed by those who quest power and who view the Constitution as a mere inconvenience to that quest. You know, there are secular progressives who don't believe that this is a great nation and who certainly do not believe in, let alone put their trust in God, are in positions of power. As noted previously, our Constitution, which is clearly under attack, I see it day in and day out. Our Constitution is designed to protect our liberty and prevent government tyranny, which inevitably erodes our freedoms. But you know, we Americans, we faced such a crisis in the past. As Thomas Paine reminds us, quote, tyranny like hell is not easily conquered. You know, we have this consolation with us that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives us everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. End quote. Freedom is highly rated, and tyranny is like hell. We must defend the former with all our might, and with God's grace, we will defend the latter. Similar to when those patriots signed our Declaration of Independence in 1776, today we live in a pivotal time. Consequently, we must ask, are we willing, as our founders were, to fight and, if necessary, die for our God-given rights? As Thomas Paine further observed, these are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. End quote. Thus the choice is clear, and I'm going to leave you with this challenge. Will you be a summer soldier and a sunshine patriot, or will you fight to protect and preserve our freedoms for this generation, for your generation, and for the generations that follow? Each one of us should strive to make our generation the greatest generation any society has ever produced. And with that, I want to congratulate once again, the recipients of the Young American Awards. And may God bless all of you, and may God continue to bless our great nation. Thank you.